one of the issues that's been bubbling away in rural New Zealand for quite some time, um, and ironically, it sort of dovetails into another issue. Sorry, I'll explain. When I was a young member of parliament and a young candidate in the late 1980s, early 1990s, there was a very strong view amongst rural New Zealand that the corporatisation and sale of New Zealand farms to overseas companies and individuals was killing rural New Zealand uh, by essentially aggregating land on farms and then having it farmed on corporate lines. And the big argument of those days, we should stop selling rural land and farms to foreigners. And that was a big issue, late 80s, 90s. That battle was lost. And now the next battle that seems to be almost Pyrrhic as well is fighting against carbon forestry. So many communities, and this is throughout the country and certainly in my neck of the woods as well, are watching what is good arable land, in other words, good land for growing sheep and beef, and crops, I guess, as well, but mostly sheep and beef, be turned into carbon forestry because, well, frankly, that's where the incentives are. Large pine plantations being created with their own issues, it has to be said, and nonetheless, there is an economic gain from farmers converting or for selling their land to companies dedicated to carbon forestry. Well, the result of that is where our next guest comes from. He is very much in the camp that this carbon forestry is destroying rural New Zealand and his particular neck of the woods in Hawke's Bay, but throughout the country in general. And he joins us now, Mark Speedy. Mark, welcome to the show.
Mike, how are you?
First of all, tell me a little bit about yourself. How did you get involved in this issue and why am I talking to you?
Well, originally we went into forestry in the early 90s for production forestry. Joined the ETS scheme from there, but it has morphed into today with carbon forestry. So there is a subtle difference. So we store the carbon in the log, it is then processed, sent away, whereas carbon forestry, you can only collect the carbon for the life of the pine tree. So once the pine tree is old and died, and we're talking about Pinus radiata, which is a quick-growing pine, we're not too sure how long they will live for, between 50. Does not store any more carbon, so it is of no use. What happens to the land after that? Well, to mechanically revert that back to farmland would be a huge cost. The cheapest method, of course, would be burning. Production forestry, however...
No, we're cutting in and out for Mark, so we'll just go and sort that out. Mark and a number of others are particularly concerned, it has to be said, about carbon forestry going through the Hawke's Bay. Now, I know the area relatively well, certainly around Herbertville and Pongaroa and those sorts of places, and sheep and beef farming has been the mainstay, not simply of those economies in those areas, but also, it has to be said, the social fabric of those areas or small rural places as well. Now I'm looking at huge carbon forestry being planted there, not production forestry, but across particularly the rolling hills of the Hawke's Bay. And I have to be honest with you, they're ugly, and they're going to get uglier still. What they also do is they stop communities. So in other words, if I've just planted thousands of hectares in carbon forestry, I can just sort of walk away from it. I'm not doing any silviculture or anything like that, but I am being given an enormous commercial gain from doing so. Which seems odd, doesn't it? You can just simply plant a tree, walk away, and God, what, retire? It'd be fascinating to talk to people who are involved in carbon forestry or farmers who were on that basis as to what the returns are to their land. Many, I imagine, farmers would also say, well, that land's not productive, I'll put that in carbon forestry and do a bit of sheep and beef farming as well. But it'd be interesting to know where they derive their income from. Is it from the carbon forestry or from the sheep and beef? We'll come back with Mark after that, after we get the link back up, hopefully. Mark Speedy is back. Let's go and talk to Mark. Mark, you're back.
Yeah,
what's
we're
the
back,
problem? Have
Mike.
you got poor coverage or something there, have you?
We had a short power cut as well. We don't live that close to town, so we quite often get power cuts.
Oh, you must have our lines company looking after you. Mark, can I ask a question? So let's get cut to the thing here. So
Yeah.
you are in plantation forestry, which means it's an industry for you. You're in
Yes.
the Hawke's Bay, and your argument is, well, I look after it, I'm going to cut it down, then I'm going to replant it again. I've got an industry here. There are plenty of people being employed. Off we go. You're saying that
Yes.
carbon forestry, I simply grow the thing, I walk away, and there's no long-term plan as to what happens next. Is that right?
Oh, absolutely. Carbon credits are a false economy. It is plant and walk away. It is a good way for people to get together and buy land for carbon. I mean, you could do this from your house in Parnell and things like that. You know, you could just ask Winston Peters and the pirate of the provinces, Shane Jones, about that. You know, it is a good way for people to make money without even stepping on the land, or looking at it or anything. So we have a problem there. These trees will only last, we're not too sure, but will last up to 150 years tops. After that, they don't store any more carbon. And so what happens to the land then? You know, you're done and dusted. They won't pull grass into the emissions trading scheme. And now with grass, like your back lawn, say, at the low end, 1 hectare will produce 20 tonnes of carbon. And it'll keep doing that for thousands of years. You know, it's a lot longer
Put vineyards or orchards in either.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's not a level playing field for anyone. It is negative.
Listen, we all know the craziness of it, Mark, but unfortunately the incentive is what those people are doing. In your neck of the woods in Hawke's Bay, can I ask you, who are the people, who are the farmers who are getting into carbon forestry? Are they sheep and beef farmers who won't go, well, there's no money on this, I'll just go and put it into pine and take the credits?
The carbon farming has raised the price of the land. So roughly you'd be making a third more than sheep and beef on marginal land per hectare. And that's the crux of it. A lot of young aren't really coming into farming, so we do have a lot of farmers just exiting and will just sell to a carbon company. I know that National is stopping the sale of wholesale farms to a foreign investor, but it doesn't stop farmers from bringing in a foreign investor to plant out most of the farm. Or if you're like New Zealand's second largest private landowner, Earnslaw One, which is owned by the King family out of China, you just buy the land within New Zealand anyway. So I'm not too sure how their policies are actually going to work there, if it'll work at all. I think it's totally flawed. And it's all based on Luxon signing up for the climate change, isn't it? The IPCC reports. And this is where things get a little bit grey around the gills on this, because within the reports, every report to date, they talk about thermal power balance, referred to as energy balance, okay? So what they're saying greenhouse gases can radiate more energy back to the surface than they do in space. Now, anyone who I suppose has studied a bit of physics and things like that would know that contravenes Kirchhoff's law, and with it the law of conservation of energy. So the greenhouse effect theory is fundamentally bad.
So is your basic argument, Mark, that the reason you're opposed is because you don't believe that the climate change or the climate, arrangements that New Zealand has entered, including the Paris Protocol, etc., are based upon good science?